Most people think emotional strength comes from never feeling anything, but real strength comes from knowing exactly how to handle your reactions when someone tries to push your buttons. The truth is, you can't control what people say, but you can control how much access they get to your peace. Today, we're diving into the mindset and habits that stop you from getting triggered, not temporarily, but permanently. This is about building a level of calm that becomes your default, no matter who you're dealing with. Reactivity is something most people mistake for a personality trait, when in reality, it's just a repeated loop your mind has practiced until it feels automatic. When someone says something sharp or disrespectful, your brain doesn't pause to evaluate. It jumps straight into an old script it learned somewhere along the way. Maybe it came from childhood, maybe from past relationships, maybe from environments where you had to react fast just to protect yourself. Over time, that reaction becomes muscle memory, and you start believing this is just who I am, but it isn't. It's simply what your brain has rehearsed the most. The moment you see reactivity as a habit instead of an identity, things start to shift. A habit can be changed, reprogrammed, replaced with something stronger and calmer. Identity feels permanent, habit feels temporary. One keeps you stuck, the other gives you power. And the second your brain realizes there's no threat, that you're not the same person you were when you first learned that reaction, the trigger loses its grip. You stop letting someone else's tone or words lock you into a defensive state. You begin to respond from who you are now, not who you had to be then. When you detach your sense of self from the reaction, it becomes easier to observe the emotion instead of being taken hostage by it. Instead of saying, I'm angry, you start saying, I'm noticing anger coming up. That single shift puts space between you and the feeling. Now you're not the storm, you're the sky watching the storm pass through. And when you're the one observing instead of absorbing, people lose the ability to pull you into their emotional world. You stop being dragged into conflicts, arguments, or tension that doesn't belong to you. Most triggers stay alive because we never question them. We just react the same way every time, and the brain keeps reinforcing the pattern like tracks in the ground that get deeper each year. But once you recognize that your reactions are just rehearsed scripts, you can start rewriting them. You can decide that someone's sarcasm or criticism doesn't require your immediate emotional response. You can decide to give the situation a second, a breath, a pause, and each time you do, you weaken the old pattern. Eventually, the reaction that used to feel automatic begins to feel optional. There's something incredibly freeing about realizing you don't owe anyone your emotional activation. The moment you choose not to react, you're reclaiming control. You're telling your mind, I decide what gets access to my peace. And slowly that becomes your new habit, one based on awareness rather than instinct. People around you start losing their power over your internal world, because you're no longer responding out of old wounds or old programming. You're responding out of clarity, choice, and emotional discipline. Reactivity isn't a permanent part of your personality. It's just a pattern your brain got comfortable repeating. But patterns change when awareness enters the room. When you understand that your triggers are learned, you stop taking them so personally. You stop believing they define you. And that's where the shift begins, not in trying to force yourself to be calm, but in realizing you were never a reactive person to begin with. You were simply someone running an old script, and now you're someone learning to write a new one. The pause is the single most powerful tool you have, yet it's the one most people never use because reacting feels faster, easier, and familiar. When someone throws a comment at you that stings or tries to provoke you, your nervous system instantly wants to fire back. It wants to defend, correct, explain, or attack. But that first impulse is almost never the one that protects your peace. The pause interrupts that impulse. It cuts the cord between stimulus and reaction. It gives you the fraction of a second needed for your mind to catch up to your emotions. And that space, that tiny gap, is where your real power lives. Without it, you're operating on autopilot. With it, you're choosing your response. The pause isn't about being silent forever or letting people walk over you. It's about buying time for your brain to move out of the emotional center and back into your thinking center. When you pause, your heart rate slows, your breathing shifts, your perspective widens. You stop viewing the situation as an attack and start seeing it as information. That shift alone can prevent arguments, misunderstandings, and emotional spirals that would have taken hours or days to recover from. Most conflicts aren't actually caused by the problem. They're caused by the reaction that happens before we understand the problem. The pause stops you from fueling the fire before you even know what sparked it. People often think the pause is weakness because it looks passive on the outside, but internally, it's one of the strongest mental moves you can make. You're choosing not to let someone else's energy dictate your state. You're choosing not to reward a trigger with a reaction. And the moment you do that, the dynamic switches. You go from being controlled by the moment to controlling the moment. It's like shifting from being inside the turbulence to stepping into the cockpit. Suddenly you see options, angles, and choices that weren't visible before because the emotion was too loud. Most of the time, the pause also reveals people's intentions. When you don't react immediately, you get to see whether the other person was trying to communicate or just trying to get a rise out of you. Someone who genuinely wants to talk will stay calm when you pause. Someone who wants drama will get uncomfortable because the pause denies them the chaos they were hoping for. And that tells you more about the situation than any reaction ever could. The pause becomes a filter, showing you what kind of energy you're dealing with without saying a single word. The more you practice the pause, the more natural it becomes. At first, it feels like holding your breath. You're fighting the urge to jump in, defend yourself, or match their intensity. But over time, the pause becomes your default. It becomes second nature. And people notice. They stop trying to trigger you because they realize it doesn't work anymore. You're no longer predictable. You're no longer easy to provoke. You've rewired your internal system to stay steady under pressure, and that steadiness creates an invisible boundary that people learn to respect. Mastering the pause doesn't mean you're emotionless. It means you're emotionally disciplined. It means you give yourself time to respond instead of letting the moment decide for you. It means you've learned to value your peace more than the satisfaction of reacting. And when you consistently choose that space, that breath, that beat, that moment, you shift from being someone who gets pulled into every emotional wave to someone who stands grounded no matter how strong the tide comes in. The pause becomes your power, your protection, and ultimately your freedom. Detachment is one of the most misunderstood emotional skills because people assume it means shutting down, becoming cold, or removing yourself from caring about anything. But real detachment has nothing to do with being distant. It has everything to do with seeing clearly. When you're attached, you take every comment, tone, attitude, or reaction personally. You interpret people's behavior as a direct reflection of your worth. But when you detach, you stop assuming everything is about you. You step back just far enough to observe instead of absorb. Detachment gives you the emotional distance to see what's actually happening instead of reacting to what your mind assumes is happening. It isn't withdrawal. It's clarity that protects your peace. When you're overly attached to an outcome, a person's approval, or a specific emotional response from someone, your triggers get sharper and stronger. Every small shift in someone's tone feels like a threat. Every misunderstanding feels like rejection. Every disagreement feels like a personal attack. But when you detach, you stop giving your emotional power to these moments. You stop expecting people to act a certain way so you can feel okay. You stop relying on external consistency to maintain internal stability. Detachment lets you stand solid even when someone else is inconsistent, irritated, or projecting their own issues onto you. It removes the emotional dependency that makes other people's moods feel like your responsibility. Detachment also gives you room to see people's behavior for what it really is: communication about their inner world. When you're too close to the situation emotionally, everything feels magnified. But when you pull back even slightly, you start recognizing patterns. You notice when someone is speaking from stress instead of intention. You notice when their tone has more to do with their day than with you. You notice when the situation isn't about you at all. And that awareness makes you less reactive because you're no longer taking on emotional weight that never belonged to you. Detachment is the lens that turns emotional chaos into emotional information. The more clarity you gain, the less pressure you feel to respond instantly or dramatically. You no longer react because you no longer feel cornered. You see options, you see motives, you see reality. That's where the real freedom comes in. When you're detached, you can disagree without feeling threatened. You can listen without feeling attacked. You can walk away without feeling guilty. You can hold boundaries without feeling like you're losing something. Detachment gives every emotion and every situation space to breathe. And in that space, your reactions become intentional instead of automatic. Something powerful happens when you approach situations with clear detachment. Other people's behavior stops controlling your emotional temperature. You begin to notice yourself staying calmer in situations that used to trigger you. You stop chasing explanations. You stop replaying conversations in your head. You stop defending yourself to people determined to misunderstand you. You respond from a grounded place because your emotional stability no longer depends on someone else's approval, tone, or validation. You've created an internal foundation that doesn't crack just because someone else is having a moment. Detachment isn't coldness. It's emotional maturity. It means you can care without losing yourself. You can love without clinging. You can help without carrying. And you can listen without absorbing. It means you've developed enough inner strength to stay centered regardless of who tries to pull you off balance. When you operate with that level of clarity, people stop being able to trigger you the way they once did. Their words might land, but they don't sink. Their attitude might be loud, but it doesn't drown you. Detachment is the clarity that keeps your peace intact no matter what energy walks into the room. Most of the triggers you experience don't actually come from what someone says. They come from the meaning your mind attaches to it. When someone raises their voice, ignores you, criticizes you, or speaks with an edge, your brain instantly tries to interpret the moment. What does this say about me? But the reality is, most of what people do has nothing to do with you at all. Their behavior is a reflection of their emotional state, their stress, their insecurities, their history, their habits, and their unresolved issues. When you understand that, you stop internalizing every tone and every attitude as a statement about your worth. You start seeing their actions as a mirror showing you them, not a mirror showing you yourself. The moment you stop personalizing other people's behavior, you free yourself from emotional chains you didn't even realize you were carrying. Someone being short with you isn't proof that you're unimportant. Someone rolling their eyes isn't evidence that you're wrong. Someone criticizing you harshly says more about how they handled discomfort than about how you handled the situation. When people speak from anger, fear, ego, or insecurity, they're displaying their internal world, not making a final judgment on yours. Once you begin reading their behavior as communication about their emotional state, your own emotional reactions become much calmer. You stop absorbing the weight of their issues. Understanding this creates a massive shift in how you respond to conflict. Instead of getting defensive, you become curious. Instead of reacting, you start observing. You ask yourself, is this really about me? Or is this coming from something they're dealing with? That question alone can dissolve half your triggers because most of the time it isn't about you at all. Someone rushing you may just be overwhelmed. Someone snapping may be anxious about something else. Someone being distant may be carrying a burden they haven't shared. Once you see people through this lens, their behavior loses the power to destabilize you. This doesn't mean you excuse poor behavior. It means you stop internalizing it. You can still set boundaries, speak up, and hold your ground, but you do it from clarity rather than reaction. You don't allow someone's emotional instability to dictate your response. You stay steady because you see the situation for what it is, not what your ego fears it means. This kind of emotional separation lets you stay calm even in moments where you would have once gotten triggered, not because you don't care, but because you understand what's actually happening beneath the surface. Another important part of this mindset is remembering that everyone carries invisible experiences that shape how they show up. You never fully know what someone is going through, the exhaustion, the pressure, the insecurities, the fear they're trying to hide. Sometimes the behavior that feels like a personal attack is really someone struggling to manage their own internal storm. When you understand that, you start responding with more patience, not because you're weak, but because you're wise enough to see the whole picture. You stop letting their emotional storm pull you into it. You observe it without stepping into the chaos. When you realize that people's reactions describe them, not you, triggers lose their sharpness. Comments don't hit as hard. Tones don't feel as personal. You no longer make someone else's emotional state the judge of your value. Their disappointment doesn't define your capability. Their frustration doesn't define your character. Their impatience doesn't define your importance. You stand grounded in who you are because you've separated your identity from someone else's behavior. And that separation is what gives you emotional freedom. It's the moment you stop giving other people authority over your peace and start living from a place of clarity instead of reactivity. Building an internal system stronger than the noise around you means creating a foundation that doesn't shake every time someone else has an opinion, an attitude, or an emotional outburst. Most people live with their emotional stability tied directly to what's happening outside of them. If someone likes them, they feel good. If someone criticizes them, they fall apart. If someone gives them attention, they're confident. If someone pulls away, they doubt themselves. That's a fragile way to live because it means your peace depends on forces you can't control. But when you build a solid internal system, your emotions stop fluctuating based on external changes. You start operating from a grounded core, not from reactions to whatever energy is thrown at you. This internal system is built from habits, not moments. You don't develop emotional discipline in the middle of an argument. You develop it in the quiet moments when nobody's testing you. It's built by deciding what you will and won't give power to. It's built by creating boundaries that you actually enforce. It's built by reflecting on your emotions instead of burying them. It's built by learning your triggers so you can disarm them, not deny them. Over time, these habits solidify into a mental framework that remains steady even when people around you are chaotic, dramatic, or disrespectful. You become the calm in the storm instead of the person swallowed by it. When you take responsibility for your internal world, you stop expecting other people to regulate it for you. You no longer need someone to talk nicely to you just so you can stay calm. You no longer need someone to agree with you so you can feel secure. You no longer need someone's reassurance to feel valuable. Your self-respect becomes non-negotiable. Your boundaries become clear. Your emotional reactions become measured. And because you aren't outsourcing your stability, people lose their ability to shake you. Their moods don't dictate yours. Their disappointment doesn't collapse your confidence. Their approval stops being the currency that determines your worth. A strong internal system also transforms how you handle conflict. Instead of reacting instantly, you engage intentionally. Instead of becoming defensive, you become thoughtful. You understand that protecting your peace doesn't always mean winning the argument. Sometimes it means refusing to participate in it. Sometimes it means walking away. Sometimes it means responding with calm instead of matching their intensity. Because when you're anchored internally, you're not desperate to prove yourself to anyone. You don't need to dominate the conversation or defend every detail. You know who you are, and that certainty keeps you steady. Another crucial piece of this system is emotional understanding. You become less reactive when you understand your own emotional patterns. You recognize when you're tired, overwhelmed, or vulnerable, and you adjust. You don't force yourself to engage when you know you're not in the right headspace. You take breaks, process your feelings, and return when you're centered. That self-awareness prevents unnecessary conflicts and protects your relationships. It also makes it harder for others to manipulate you because you can distinguish between genuine communication and emotional pressure. When your inner system becomes stronger than the external noise, you stop letting people control your internal weather. Their storms don't become your storms. Their chaos doesn't become your chaos. Their insecurity doesn't become your insecurity. You navigate situations with calm, clarity, and confidence because your emotional stability comes from within, not from the shifting moods of others. That's the moment you become untriggerable, not because life gets easier, but because you've built a mental foundation that can handle whatever life drops at your feet. You're no longer reacting to the world. You're responding to it from a place of strength, awareness, and unshakable inner peace.